You know when you have that feeling that something is wrong, but you can't explain it? That's exactly how it all started. My name is Maria Helena, and what I'm going to tell you happened exactly 3 years ago when I was still living with Ricardo, my ex-husband, in the old house we inherited from his grandmother. Ricardo has always been an attentive and caring man. We met at college, and after 2 years of dating, we decided to get married. Everything seemed perfect for the first 5 years of marriage until I started to notice small changes in his behavior. At first, it was subtle things, late arrivals from work, hidden messages on the cell phone, different perfumes. But what really disturbed me wasn't this obvious evidence of betrayal. It was something more dark. Every time Ricardo arrived home late at night, a strong smell of sulfur invaded our room. The lights flickered without explanation, and I could have sworn I heard feminine laughter echoing through the empty hallways. I remember clearly the first time I felt a presence watching me. I was alone in the living room, crying after discovering a suspicious message on Ricardo's cell phone when all the photo frames at our wedding fell simultaneously. The scariest? In every photo, there was a dark shadow next to my husband that I'm sure wasn't there before. I started to notice subtle changes in Ricardo. He arrived later and later from work, always with different excuses. The different perfume on his shirts became frequent. But what disturbed me most were the mysterious calls he received late at night. When questioned, he became nervous, aggressive, something that had never been part of his personality. One night, while he was in the shower, his cell phone vibrated on the kitchen table. The message that appeared on the screen made my heart freeze. "Today was wonderful, my love. I can't wait to see you tomorrow." The contact's name? Work meeting. But there was something even more disturbing going on. Every time I found out more about this betrayal, the lights in the house flickered inexplicably. Objects moved around on their own, and a putrid smell of sulfur invaded some rooms of the house. It was as if each discovery of infidelity fueled something evil that grew between us. That night, something completely changed in our relationship. As I watched Ricardo sleeping next to me, I noticed that his face was different, darker. The smell of women's perfume that I smelled on his shirt earlier still burned in my nostrils. But it wasn't just that. There was something else, something otherworldly. That's when I first noticed the little marks on his neck. They weren't hickeys like I initially imagined. They were like little burns shaped like symbols that I had never seen before. Upon lightly touching one of them, Ricardo woke up with a start. His eyes, for a split second, he would have sworn they were completely black. He started talking about work, about how stressed he was, but his voice sounded different. It was as if two voices were speaking at the same time, his and another, much deeper and more drawn out. When I asked about the brands, he laughed in a way that made my blood run cold. "They're just scratches from work, my love," he said. But something in his smile told me there was much more behind those marks. That morning, I couldn't sleep anymore. I watched the shadows on the ceiling of the room dance unnaturally, while I heard Ricardo mumble incomprehensible words in his sleep. At one point, I'm sure I saw a shadow come off the wall and slide over his body, as if it were a dark lover embracing him. I decided to follow Ricardo that rainy afternoon. Something inside me screamed that this wasn't just an ordinary betrayal. The whispers I heard around the house, the objects that moved on their own, all pointed to something more sinister. I kept my distance as his car wound through increasingly deserted streets until it stopped in front of an old house on the outskirts of town. That was when I saw Helena for the first time. She came out of the house to greet him, but there was something deeply disturbing about her appearance. His gait was almost floating, and even in the rain, his long black hair didn't get wet. When she hugged Ricardo, I could see, through the fogged glass of my car, that her hands left dark marks on his shirt, the same marks I had noticed on his neck. The most terrifying thing happened when she looked directly at my car. Even at this distance, his eyes glowed an unearthly amber color. His smile widened in a way impossible for a human face, revealing rows of pointy teeth. At that moment, I understood that I wasn't dealing with a simple lover. I was facing something much older and more evil. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel when I saw the two of them entering the house. The windows began to emanate a pulsating red light, and I could have sworn I heard chants in a language that made my ears hurt. Whatever was happening in there was turning my husband into something that was no longer human. At church, I finally found some answers, but not the ones I expected. Father Miguel, an elderly man with eyes that seemed to penetrate his soul, turned pale when I showed him the photo of the marks on Ricardo's neck. His hands shook as he held the rosary. "My daughter," he said in a choked voice, "this is not a simple marital betrayal. These marks are ancient symbols of a love possession ritual. Someone is using very dark forces to manipulate your husband." He told me about a woman who had come to the church months ago, desperate to win back a lost love. The priest had warned her about the dangers of seeking help in the dark, but she disappeared, swearing that she would do anything to get this man back. As the priest spoke, the candles on the altar began to waver without any wind. The air became heavy, and a strong smell of sulfur permeated the church. That's when he revealed something to me that chilled my spine. "This woman, she worked in the same office as your husband, and 3 days after our conversation, she turned up dead in her apartment with the same marks you showed me." At that moment, an icy wind blew out all the candles in the church, and I swear I heard a feminine laugh echo between the sacred walls. I decided to investigate the office where Ricardo worked. I took advantage of one Sunday when he said he needed to resolve some issues at work, another one of his lies. Using the copy of the key I made secretly, I entered the empty building. The silence was deafening. On his desk, I found a locked drawer. When I finally managed to open it, my heart almost stopped. There were dozens of old photos of a woman, Marina Santos, according to the badge on one of them. It was the same one the priest had mentioned. But what shocked me was realizing that all the photos had been taken without her knowing, as if someone was stalking her. Suddenly, the computer on the next table turned on by itself. On the screen, a file began to open repeatedly. Contract.pdf. My hands were shaking as I clicked to read. It was a document signed in blood, dated 3 months ago, exactly when Ricardo began to change. At the bottom of the page, there was a mark identical to those on his neck. The air became thick, and a strong scent of rotting roses filled the room. In the reflection of the monitor, I saw a female silhouette standing behind me. When I turned around, there was no one, but on the computer screen, a message began to type by itself. "He was mine before he was yours. Now he will be mine forever." The protection ritual that Father Miguel taught me seemed to be working, but that night of the new moon, something terrible happened. I was alone at home, spreading coarse salt in the corners of the rooms, when I heard footsteps upstairs. Richard was supposed to be working late. Walking up the stairs, my heart almost stopped when I heard moans coming from our room. They weren't moans of pain. They were of pleasure. The door was ajar, and what I saw through it made me question my own sanity. Ricardo was there, but he was not alone. Above him, there was a female figure, but it was not entirely human. His skin had an ashy tone, and his movements were wrong, as if his limbs were bent at impossible angles. The worst thing was his eyes, completely black, fixed on me through the crack in the door. When she smiled, her teeth were pointy and too numerous for a human mouth. That's when I recognized her face. It was Helena, the employee who had died months ago. But now she was there, her corrupted, demonic form consuming the life energy of my husband, who seemed in a trance. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The crucifix around my neck began to burn, and the shadows on the walls came to life, dancing like black flames around the unholy scene. Desperation made me act on instinct. I ran to the basement, where I kept the items that Father Miguel had given me. My hands shook as I frantically searched for the bottle of holy water and the special crucifix among the dusty boxes. That's when I heard it. A scratching sound coming down the stairs, like claws against wood. Helena's voice, if she could still call her that, echoed through the house in a grotesque mixture of whispers and laughter. "He was always mine," the voice said, "even before you, even after death." The air became thick, heavy with a putrid smell of decay. The lights began to flicker violently, and I could see his distorted shadow approaching through the cracks in the basement door. Ricardo came close behind, its eyes completely white, moving like a marionette. I found what I was looking for, but when I turned to the stairs, my blood ran cold. Helena was there, her body contorted impossibly, running down the steps like a spider. His skin was now covered in those same symbols I had seen on his neck. Ricardo, but they seemed to pulse with a reddish light. The crucifix in my hands began to vibrate, and Father Miguel's words echoed in my mind. When love turns into obsession, a door to hell opens. In that desperate moment, I realized there was only one way to save Ricardo. Father Miguel had warned me that the liberation ritual would be dangerous, but I had no choice. With shaking hands, I began to recite the sacred Latin words that I had memorized. The entity that possessed Helena roared inhumanely, making the house's windows shake. Ricardo began to convulse on the bed, his eyes rolling back as a black substance oozed from his mouth. The air became so thick I could barely breathe. Suddenly, all the photos on the walls started to spontaneously catch fire. The flames were not normal. They had a bluish tone and did not burn the paper, only Ricardo's images. The creature that had once been Helen writhed in impossible ways, her limbs twisting like serpents as she screamed in an ancient, forbidden language. The crucifix in my hands began to glow with an intense golden light, and I could see, in horror, as the marks on Ricardo's neck began to bleed, forming symbols on the white sheet. The entity tried to attack, its elongated claws aiming for my face, but something prevented it from getting closer, an invisible circle of protection created by prayers. That's when I heard Helena's voice, not the creature, but the real Helena, emerge for a brief moment. "Help me." He promised eternal love, but he deceived me. Now I'm trapped. With Helena's voice echoing in my mind, I realized that she was trapped, but she was also a victim. What was a simple betrayal turned into a cycle of pain that extended beyond life. I couldn't allow this to continue. I increased the intensity of the prayer, and the light from the crucifix became dazzling, illuminating every corner of the room. The shadows began to retreat, and Helena's demonic figure let out a deafening scream, as if she was being torn apart. Ricardo, in the midst of torment, began to slowly wake up, his eyes still hazy but full of confusion. "Love?" he murmured, his voice just a sliver of hope. But I knew I wasn't safe yet. The entity in Helena was weakening, but its fury was increasing. She turned to me, her true nature exposed, and I saw the pain and hatred she carried. "You can't have what's mine," she screamed, her claws reaching towards me. But I didn't back down. With one last effort, I summoned all the strength I had and cried out for divine protection, asking for the light to drive out the darkness. In an instant, the room exploded into a glow so intense that everything around us seemed to be consumed. When the light finally dissipated, everything was silent. Helena's form had disappeared, and with it, the marks on Ricardo's neck. He looked at me, confused, and then understood. "What happened?" His voice trembled. I knew that our lives would never be the same, that the betrayal had left deep scars. But at that moment, what mattered was that he was back. Knowing that the battle had been won, but the war was still far from over, I just hugged Ricardo, relieved, but aware that the shadows would never be completely gone. In the heat of that supernatural battle, I knew that Ricardo's fate was in my hands. With a last breath of courage, I recited the final words of the ritual, and the light from the crucifix exploded into a blinding glow, causing the entity to scream and writhe until it finally disappeared in a dark cloud. The pressure in the air dissipated, and as I looked at Ricardo, I saw that he had come to, confused and scared, but free. Experience has taught me that true love should not be manipulated by dark forces, and that betrayal, even in life, can have consequences beyond death. Now, I'm here to share this story with you so that no one else faces the same fate as me. If you like this true horror story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to receive more chilling stories. And if you've had similar experiences, share your story in the comments. Let's explore the mysteries that surround us together.